Good morning, Senator. It's great to see you today.
And I'm glad to see you, and thank you for this opportunity to speak of what's going on in Ukraine. I'm very interested in that.
I'm glad to hear that, Senator. Why do you think Ukraine is so important for the United States?
Well, one would be the 1993 Budapest Agreement. Another one would be Article 5 of NATO, because if Putin would decide to build up the Russian Empire, as he said his goal is, that would include the Baltics and part of Poland. And instead of the United States being interested in just the defense and sovereignty of Ukraine, and spending money in that direction, we would be spending many times more money to defend NATO or to defend our obligations under the Budapest Agreement. And in the case of NATO, that could even include American blood. So I think it's in our national security interest to support Ukraine outside of the leadership responsibilities that the United States has, is to have a consistent foreign policy so our friends will follow us and so that our enemies will fear us.
Senator, but you on a personal level seem to be very strongly supportive of Ukraine. What do you see in Ukraine? What is it that makes this such a personally important issue for you?
A democracy. I think the United States has morally supported democracies around the world. Sometimes we deal with autocratic governments that maybe we shouldn't be dealing with, but that might be in short term in our national security interest. But I think we have a responsibility of promoting democracy. And I think just peace through strength that you heard Reagan talk about 50 years ago is still a pretty good policy. And another thing is, let's say I have 30 religious leaders of Ukraine come to the United States to say how they're being persecuted. And just think, going back to the Helsinki Accords, and I know that the Helsinki Accords probably don't speak to modern day Russia as it did the Soviet Union, but just think, the Soviet Union, what it's doing to the persecution of particularly evangelical Christians, but even in some cases, the Ukraine Orthodox Church. We ought to be standing up for religious freedom. It's not only a principle of the United States, it's a principle in the United Nations Charter. I'll bet it's even a principle in the Constitution of Russia. I haven't read that Constitution, but you know how communists are. They want to act like they're big democratic governments, and so they're going to have freedom of religion, I'll bet.
In fact, yes, the Russian Constitution does guarantee a freedom of religion, which it does not respect. Now, going forward in the next year, Ukraine just received finally a huge amount of support from the United States last month. But going forward to 2025, Ukraine will require further support from the United States in order to win the war. Do you think that's going to be forthcoming? Do you think that the House and Senate will be able to come together with something and get signed by the president in order to support Ukraine next year?
Well, obviously, I hope so, because you know what my votes have been in the past. I can only speak for myself. I think it's impossible to answer your questions till after November the 5th. And from what people are, from the slow movement by the Biden administration and some of the things that Trump has indicated, which I hope is not real policy at this point and he wouldn't follow through on it, but it's just impossible to answer your question. But I think, can I go back to something I should have said at the beginning, and you didn't really ask me a question about?
Sure.
But when, like the recent one was $65 billion for Kyiv. I think Americans that have questions about whether or not we should be helping Kyiv and Ukraine would say to me, why are you sending $65 billion over there? And that's just exactly the impression they get. But I think you know that 24 million of that is going to be spent in the United States to rebuild our warehouses of war material, improve our warehouses of material, and also support enhancement of our defense industry because it's very weak right now. And then 12 billion of it's going to go to support our enhanced military in the case of Europe and NATO, just because of the potential threat of Putin. And then, that doesn't take care of all of it, but I'll bet 2/3 of it is going to be spent right here in America with American workers getting benefit.
Absolutely the case, sir. Let me ask you just one last question. As you're certainly aware, some nefarious state actors, such as Russia, are using things like social media to subvert US politics in order to disinform the American population as to what's going on important issues, both domestic and international, including such as the topic of Ukraine. What do you think should be done? Because these social media companies are aware that there's a significant problem, but have not taken steps to address them on any serious level. Do you think perhaps this should be investigated? Should there be hearings? Or do you think perhaps there should be regulations? What should be done with these social media companies that are allowing Americans to be disinformed by our enemies?
Well, unrelated to the question you talk about Russian disinformation, I think there's a lot of reform of social media that should be done, but most of it deals with what we call Section 230, the inability to sue the platforms. And I would vote to change that. Now, that may affect something that you're asking me about, but that's not my answer to your question. And first of all, I'd like to state to you that this disinformation that you're talking about is some of the reasons we have this misunderstanding that $65 billion isn't all going to Kyiv for them to spend any way they want to, or even on the war that people in this country might not approve of, because that disinformation is getting around this country. And you hear it sometimes even on some of our major commercial channels. Why would we want to be helping Ukraine and starting a war with Russia? We're trying to prevent a war with Russia, and we're trying to promote democracy. So, getting back to your question, it's difficult to answer in a country where our Constitution protects free speech and government can't censor. And I've heard a lot about reforming social media from the standpoint I just talked about, but not because of Russian disinformation. Although I think it's a problem for those of us that want to support Ukraine with this money that we voted for. Beyond that, it's difficult because, we're a country that government can't censor.
Sure thing, sir. Very good. Well, is there anything else you would like to say to the Ukrainian people, perhaps?
Yeah, I think I'd like to speak to the evangelical Christians there in Ukraine that I'm going to do everything I can through actions, speeches, press releases, things of that nature, even my vote for Ukraine help, that we want to protect their freedom of religion. We want to protect their right to preach from the gospel however they want to, according to the gospel. And they shouldn't have to have their life threatened as a result of it. And I find it outrageous that the Russian Orthodox Church very strongly supporting this effort of Putin to commandeer Ukraine and to do it in the name of Jesus Christ, because that's that's the church that's the person that church follows, just like the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, just like the evangelical Christians of Ukraine. And I think that we need to have all the world leaders, particularly the Christian leaders, make sure that the Russian Orthodox Church hears from all of us that they're violating the principles of Jesus Christ to love your neighbor.
Very good, Senator. We greatly appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Goodbye, and I'll be glad to talk to you again if you need it.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.